刚先学。
It's not here. I usually sent it to 13.
No. Let me show you.
Yeah, for sure.
Not because I suffer fast, not because I pray and fast. No be your show, no be that. I'm watching. Daily bossinachi, I'm no kwa bossinachi. Man, bossinachi, I'm watching. Daily bossinachi, mama bossinachi.
Need yìí kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
A ní wọ́n kéré o, wọ́n kéré o, wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa. Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa, àwọn ọmọdé wọ̀nyí kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa. Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
Not because I suffer fast, not because I pray and fast. No be your show, no be that. I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi, Namukwa, Osinachi. One lemon, Osinachi, I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi, Mama, Osinachi.
For context. We have three presenters today. We're going to go in the order. We have four. Oh, they're not here. Okay, so we're going to go in order of the program. Sorry if I say it. How do you say it? Okay, Funke Bandrian, it will be presenting Behind and Beyond Literature, Nigerian Literature and Chinese Tradition, translation, I'm sorry, since 1963. You have 20 minutes, I'll give you a 10. Would you like to use the?
I have used the microphone. Do I need to put it here?
I think she said this is best for the camera if it's not here.
So you can just start it, yeah. Yeah.
Can you get computer?
It's okay.
Thank you.
Would it be better you stay here? Stay here? Yeah, will it be better? Okay, yeah.
Then good afternoon. My name is Gong Kei, and I'm a PhD student at Peking University, China. Thank you for having me here. And today I'm going to talk about the Nigerian literature translated and published in China. Could you have my slides on? Thank you. My aim is to investigate the influence of Chinese institutions on the selection and publication of Nigerian literature work in China. Over the past 60 years, Chinese cultural institutions have been endeavoring in introducing Nigerian literature to Chinese reading public, while the emphasis placed on this translated literature work and the motivation behind its pursuits have been changing. So I think examining literature translation and publication under such kind of institutionalized influence can offer us insight into the knowledge production about Nigeria in China and the ever-changing imagination between African and China relations, and also can help us to rethink the concept of world literature. So let's start with my institution, where I'm currently studying at. Next slide, please. I'm now majoring in African cultures and literatures, and in the Department of Asian Africa Languages and Literatures, which is affiliated to the School of Foreign Language, Peking University. So people may wonder why African cultures and languages are put side to side with Asian cultures and languages. That is because a shared cause and an imagination of a kind of solidarity between Asian and Africa due to the time of the Cold War. So let's take back to the 1950s, where the disciplines of Chinese universities start to institutionalize under the background of the Cold War and also the ideology of decolonization. This historical heritage may bring us back to the Cold War, which gradually polarized the world into two camps since 1955. And it is also in the April of the same year that the first Asian African Conference, which is also called the Bandung Conference, was held in Indonesia, and representations from 29 governments of Asian African nations gathered in Bandung, Indonesia, including the Chinese government. And during this conference, the Prime Minister Zhou from China proposed seeking common ground while reserving deference to foster a broad alliance transcendent ideological difference. It's still in the front side. The final joint communique of the conference released on Bandung Conference on 1955 expressed a desire to renew the old African culture contact that was interrupted by colonialism and imperialism. And they also made an agreement on the future of cultural cooperation among countries of Asia and Africa that is to be directed towards the acquisition of each other's country, mutual cultural exchange, and the exchange of information. So in 1963, Premier Zhou also convened a meeting of relevant Chinese department heads to discuss research on international issues before his visit to the future Asian and African countries. So following the meeting, a report titled On Strengthening the Study of Foreign Affairs was made to point out that with the expansion of international diplomatic activities, so the current research on foreign affairs was insufficient to meet the demand of that situation. So at that time, Peking University was appointed to focus on research and possible talent development returned to Asia and Africa, and also national liberation movement. So that is how the Asian African Institution was established in Peking University. And at that time, Professor Ji Xianling, who is on that photo, was appointed as the dean of the Department of Asian African Institute, who is also at that time the Department of Oriental Languages and Literatures. As times evolved, the Department of Oriental Languages and Literatures changed its name to the Department of the present department where I am staying. That is called the Asian African Languages and Literature. So it is also at the background of the Cold War China reproduced the same literary institution as the Soviet Union. Cultural production was under the management of bureaus, and in 1949, which is the year that the People's Republic of China was established, the Chinese Federation of Literature and Art Circus came into being in Beijing and later was renamed as Chinese Writers Association in 1955. And this is the year that the journal called Translation was founded. And it was later renamed as World Literature, showing an attempt to reconcept the world literature from a Chinese positionality and China identity. So after it's being renamed as world literature, it started to do a lot of publication and translation related to Africa. And the first literature work published on world literature is a poem. It's in the next slide, please. It's a poem, which is thank you. Which is translated from a Russia magazine called Organic. And this poem cannot be found at present because of its translation. It's translated to a second language, but it's literally a song of a logging chopper, which describes the pre-colonial section of the nature of people cutting the wood, and later the freedom was confined and disrupted by the colonialism. And the second was a poem by Dennis Chukwu Osambe. It is a poem called The Miner, which was translated as epitaph of the victimized miners in Agunu. It suggests a massacre happened in Agunu and about the white colonizers shooting the people who are on revolution. And the third one is a selection from Things Falling Apart, which is translated as 瓦解, which means collapse or disintegration. It only selects from 20th to 21st chapters in the Brooks Grid, which describes Okonkwo's coming back from exile and found his hometown totally changed by Christianity. And it provided an official way of reading Archibald's work as an exposure of white colonizers' cruelty, criticism against capitalism, and represented by the store opened by the colonizers and the Christian church. And it also emphasized Okonkwo's period of revolution. It ends around Okonkwo's killing a court messenger without mentioning his violent suicide. So this is what the Chinese editor write about his quotation of the introduction of Things Fall Apart. We can see from his introduction that he emphasized the revolutionary experience of Okonkwo and his people, and he emphasized it's a freedom-loving people and trying to defend their independence and dignity in front of the incoming and imposed colonized modernity. So we can see that there's certain kind of strategies related to that kind of, related to that kind of imagining of Nigerian literature, which is to emphasize a common victimhood between Nigeria and China in front of certain kind of colonization and imposed modernity. Then we come to the next phase, where China starts the reform and opening up in 1978. And it is the time that the foreign literature publishing house was started. The economic reform in China start to adopt a market economy rather than the central planning of economy. So at that time, the publishers was trying to show that the new area was totally different from the previous area, and we can see that from the motto of the foreign literature publishing company. It emphasizes it emphasized that it's going to focus on introducing some kind of new work since the 1960s, which had not been addressed from the previous translation. And as the translation of foreign literature publishing house goes on, we have more complete works about Nigerian authors translated into Chinese. Most of them are focusing on the works of Wole Soyinka and Chinua Achebe. These works are published along with the works by other African authors like Ngugi, like Sango and Ferdinand Oyuno, which forms a series of 12-volume African literature translation series. And this is a picture that shows the print of Wole Soyinka and Wole Soyinka's works as interpreters, and the selection of his work. The selection of African drama was print for 43 prints, and the interpreters was print for 74,000 prints. So it's really a large amount of press at that time. And later on, Achebe and Soyinka's work was published also by other provincial presses, which keep to emerging beyond the central publishing house. Also, at that time, the publication started to emphasize Soyinka and Achebe's similarity and collaboration with the Western art, which is shown on the next slide. That is on the editorial note of this translation form. It shows that emphasize Wole Soyinka's work as a fusion of African and Western art. At that time, it started to admit the pressure and value of Western art to show a different kinds of ideology. And from times on, it starts from 2009 to 2011, they start to commercialize the previously government-owned institutions. And it was finished at 2011. From that time, the traditional belong to part of frequent colonial sectors now become to embrace commercial practice. Then they have to adapt to market demands and meet international needs. So this shift has involved diversifying revenue stream beyond the government subsidies to include book sales, intellectual property rights management, and also participate with private enterprise. In the next slide, it now shows the republishing of Wole Soyinka and Achebe's work. But on the front cover of Things Fall Apart, it starts to emphasize how many sales have been, how many copies of this work have been sold all over the world. And it has been listed as the top 15 at Amazon, and also mentioned Nelson Mandela as a figure to provide the value of Chinua Achebe's work. From later on, we also have a more and more younger generation Nigerian authors published. That is in the next slide. Thank you. Like Chikonzi Obioma and Ben Okris. The selection of the younger generation novelists are according to some Western book prize, like the Booker Prize. And another exception is Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, who is a very classic and popular hit. Almost all of the works of Chimamanda Adichie are published in China and translated. And works like Visual Obi Feminist and Dear Individual has been published for 12 times in different versions. So it happens to be collect with the Me Too movement that is ongoing since in China since the 2017 till now, where women in China start to speak out break out their silence and speak out of the sexual harassment on social media. So women in China start to search for solutions or serial guidance beyond Western investigations. So they turn to fellow countries like Nigeria to see how people with a shared colonial past tend to use feminism as a device to empower themselves. There are other works done by Nigerian female writers, and according to my interviews with the editors of these books, it says that this works done by female writers sells well and well better than those classic works. And we can see that on the cover of this book, they emphasize the common ground between Chinese women and Nigerian women, that we should meet the same situation about against the oppression of patriarchy and searching for a future through education and through self-empowerment. And at last, there is also another rising trend of directly translating Nigerian work through local language. It is mostly led by academic field. This is an example of shows an academic translated project, which is titled as an anthology of Hausa literary work. It was led by a professor called Sun Xiaomeng, who is now teaching Hausa language at Beijing Foreign Studies Universities. And we can see that although it claimed to be first collection of the literary translation directly from Hausa, it is almost little read by the reading public because of its lack of marketing strategies. And also this project is funded by the National Social Science Fund. So it's also somehow funded by the state government. And at last, I would like to end my presentation by showing a lyric which is very popular in China. It is called The Descendant of Dragon. It is a performance on the National Spring Festival TV Gala. So almost most of the Chinese citizens from the mainland have heard of that. It is also performed by Chinese singers, but it starts with lyrics like, in the Far East, there's a river. This river is Changjiang. And in the Far East, in the ancient East, and at last, is called for the awakening of the dragon to rub its eyes and awaken, to be aware of the situation. The first time I was listening to this song, I was wondering why, although we were right here in China, why should we call ourselves as someone living in the Far East? But at present, I think the symbol of the sleeping dragon is very prominent and straightforward, that it is comparing China to a sleeping dragon, which is a powerful and mighty animal, but it is sleeping in front of the West. So I think this song can show us how we might be imagine ourselves from a West perspective and looking back ourselves in a relational situation of the world geography. And I would like to introduce this song and my presentation with this song, because I think when we were trying to have dialogue with Nigerian literature, we still have to be aware of our positionality among the world and still be aware of the possible Western eye who is still in our subconsciousness. Thank you.
All right, next question. Next, we have Professor Alao from SUNY Ministerial, who will be his presentation titled Global African Geosocial Mobilities, Physical, Spatial, and Spiritual Migration of African Animals. In 20 minutes, and I'll show you. Okay.
Colleague here. Okay. Oh, the funds didn't transfer. Okay, can you make it on presentation mode, please? Can you make it presentation mode?
Here.
Okay, so I will tell you when to change because I have a lot of transitions. Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to just start by saying thank you for being here, and also thank you to my colleagues on my panel and our esteemed chair, my sister here. And that I want to first start by thanking Chukwu, my God, and thanking my Chi, and thanking my ancestors, and acknowledging all of your ancestors here as we are also here today. So my presentation, so the African diaspora has been developed intellectually in a way that divorces it from the African continent. As Africa has been written away from the diaspora in kind. So while we sit here while we're focused in Nigeria, we are still a colorful example of what Paul Zaleza calls the ties that bind Africa to its diaspora. The study of us continues to move in and out of a nexus of fluid union and stark and sharp differences. So for me, as a child of Nigerian parents, and I'm born in a Chicago hospital in the US, and someone who has found home in places like South Africa and in Ghana and Jamaica, my understanding of global Africa leans more to a fluid union as one raised in multiple Black locales. As such, this presentation is a think piece to the theoretical chapter of my forthcoming manuscript. Imagines a study of us that honors our distinct historical trajectories while considering the contemporary epistemological frameworks that understand our constant comings together. So my research focuses on Nigerian cultural productions in the United States and South Africa. But as I got deeper into framing, because my abstract looked at Nigerian and Ghanaian novels, and as I got deeper and deeper and deeper, I found that the best stories that represented the work I was doing. Even though my research is on Nigerians in South Africa and Nigerians in the US, and especially how Nigerians understand their racial identity, coming from Nigeria where we don't really understand race the same way. Me, born and raised in the US, there's a psychology of white supremacy and terror of race that I understand from infancy, right? So I'm trying to see how Nigerian authors are understanding it, this kind of shock. Chimamanda Adichie talks about this idea of becoming Black in America. And so when I was looking for the best examples of Nigerian novels that kind of speak to both this understanding of the novels, out of the 4 novels I had, I found that actually the Ghanaian novels were the ones that did the best of blending both an understanding of African heritage and understanding of race. So forgive me, but while as a way for me to find a theory that can also incorporate what I'm trying to do in Nigerian literature, I ended up focusing on a couple pieces from Ghana. So I will show you this, and then I'll show you how it ties back to my research on Nigeria. Okay, you can go to the next slide. Okay, and then click 3 times. So, thank you. So while thinking about this idea of the ties that binds Africa to its diaspora, and the diaspora going beyond just the West, but also I have friends doing research of the diaspora in places like Sri Lanka, India, Papua New Guinea, Australia. Some questions that asked are, how does African diaspora studies and Black studies inform African studies? And then how does African studies inform global Africa, right? How do each, because they are distinct disciplines, how do they inform each other? Because I have a Black studies degree, a concentration in African studies, and my focus is African diaspora studies. So I'm in all three, and I go to the conferences, and they're vastly different. And I'm wondering, how do we make sure that we're having a conversation across them? Because there are theories and epistemologies that cross over, right? And I also am wondering, how do we understand the survival of cultures of us all here away from home in the diaspora for days or for generations, right? So if you're from Nigeria, you first come to America, but you want to keep your food, your language, you want to make sure you pass it on. It's day one and you're thinking about these questions versus year 400 and you're still trying to remember something that you've never been to, a place you've never been to, while always centering our indigenous knowledge systems throughout the continent. How does our art, here focus on literature and film, tell the story of living history through our spiritual striving towards existence, being, and becoming, as the ancient conventions called Kepret. I'll talk about this in a minute here. So Kepret is a notion of becoming self, and this is from ancient Kemet, right? Ancient Egypt by the Black indigenous Africans. They understood it as the most divine, the becoming of self as the most divine manifestation of the physical self, which I would equate with the Igbo calling the being, equate to being in alignment with our chi, or the Yoruba, the Ori. And with this alignment, we are able to best contribute knowledge to our community because we best understand ourselves. We're moving towards who we're meant to be. So I want to take on some of these questions from our positioning of the art created by some of our culture producers, our community artists, while engaging the African diaspora theory and African studies framing as they can be used to inform each other. Okay, you can go to the next one. Okay, click 3 times. Okay, yeah, just keep clicking one more time. Okay, that's it. Okay, so the way I'm thinking about this just visually is that we need to think about Africa back and forth, the conversation back and forth between Africa and the diaspora, so that the study of the diaspora should have an African centering because of the African heritage that all people of the African diaspora have. And that global Africans' considerations of the study of indigenous and contemporary Africa should also be in there as well. So we can have a conversation back and forth how things are happening. I have a Yoruba colleague who's been to Brazil, and he just loves the fact that, like in Bahia, he says that there is a way that they've captured Yoruba that's ancient, that's old, from 400 years ago when they were forced, enslaved, and brought there. That's different than the Yoruba that's constantly transforming here in Yoruba land. You know, so this conversation back and forth, what could it mean for us to be well versed with our descendants on either side? And then between Africa and Africa, right? Because there are these evolutions that are happening for us amongst ourselves on the continent, you know, that also should be had. And then in the diaspora itself, a lot of times I see diaspora studies and people are focused on the US only, or you know, Cuba only, you know, but there are conversations that should be had between Cuba and Sri Lanka and India and China and the Africans that are moving back and forth. Okay, you can go to the next one. And you can click, keep going until it's at the bottom. Yes, I think that's it. Okay, so some of the major objectives, and I'll go just quickly, is one, the intervention. You can stop right there, yeah. The intervention in African studies, Black studies, and African diaspora studies by bringing them together and making them almost synonymous at times. And engaging works towards the definition of global Africa that is centered in the movement and the communication of our cultures, like the movement of ideas, knowledge, dress, art, etc., and examine how our experiences and framing of such informs other regions. So Black study theories help to define African movements and neo-colonial presence, right? The framing of race would, I think, help us understand our colonial situation in a way that we're not really thinking about. But at the same time, indigenous knowledge systems and African knowledge systems here can ground diaspora cultures in their anti-racist efforts. During like Black Lives Matter, I found that the solutions were very much like policy, change policy, but I felt that what was missing was an understanding of our ancient African heritage and how people in the continent understand ways to, to heal self, that could be informed if Black Americans had a better understanding, could help them in their efforts there. So originally, moving beyond just migration physically, I'm also thinking about spiritual and spatial migrations. And two of the pieces that I've really been interested that are Nigerian pieces that I'm not focused on today, but I want to bring were first freshwater, because in freshwater you have the story of Akwa Emezi. It's a fictionalized narrative of her own life. And in here, she moves to the US, but that's like a minimal story. The larger story is the fact that she's moving between the physical world and the spiritual world. And in a colonial home that doesn't recognize the ancient ways anymore, there's no one to guide her. So this is a story of her trying to figure out who she is and what her power is. She is a daughter of Allah Ani, our earth goddess. And as such, she has a deep calling, but she's also Ogbanje, or the Yoruba will say Abiku, and so there's also this kind of like, what's it called? What's trickster type of, like way that she also enters the world of living, the world of the dead. And so her fellow Ogbanje, her fellow spirit children, as people will call it, those who are born and then they die at early, 10 minutes, thank you, infancy or miscarriage or whatever the case may be. The idea is that when they are born and die, and then again, the mother has multiple early child deaths, that it's the same child coming and going. So in this story, it imagines this as that continued transfer between the physical world and the spiritual world. And so in this, I think about the idea that our migration is more than just physical, but also on a spiritual. But with the second one, opposite house, you have 3 locales between Yoruba land and I think London and Cuba that this daughter of Yamaya, of the ocean goddess, is imagined and transfers between in the spiritual sense, right? And so there is this kind of geographical migration that's also connected with her spiritual striving. These 2 books, though, do not go deep into an understanding of perhaps how we also survive racial oppression in the way that the next 3 pieces go. She complete, I think, one time. Yep. And so these books coming up, I think maybe it's because of Kwame Nkrumah's Pan-Africanism and the coming of African Americans often to Ghana. You see a lot of conversations between Ghana and African America, which allows them to have a conversation back and forth about what like Pan-Africanism can look like, what a relationship between the diaspora and the Africa can look like, and then sharing of knowledge in between. Okay, we'll go to the next one. Yeah, click. Then until you go to the bottom. Yeah, basically that's it. Okay, so just briefly, the idea of geosocial mobility is one that comes from Ruth Sims Hamilton. And she talks about the social identity that can thus develop within the process and proliferation of passages, and the passages between time and place are indeed meaning creating experience. So it's the idea that as we move and we move between spaces, that who we are inevitably changes. Even if it stays the same, you have to fight to keep it the same when you're in an environment that is not home. And that should still be honored and recognized. Even if, we joke in the US, your mother is still Nigerian. Well, that means she kept her home, even though she's in the US. in a place that's constantly asking her to change who she is. Bless you. But then there's also the constant shift where, you know, you hear my accent, you know, I'm born and raised there. So there's a part of me that if I want to know who I am as an Igbo woman, one, it's happening in my household, but two, I have to also strive. I have to come home as well. So there's this meaning making that happens when we move back and forth. And so this framework tries to acknowledge that if we can think about, if we can, for any community, whether it's Nigerian, Ghana, you know, Sri Lankan diaspora, South African diaspora to UK or whatever, that if you look at these components, how they came, why they came, the relationship to their home or their host land, how they understand what power and domination and inequality looks like for them, because we face all that, all of us African people around the world, how we fight against resistance, fight against this domination. And in my case here, it is, you know, honoring the representations of us by us in a world that constantly has, you know, Eurocentric analyses and representations of the African body. And then also really how we communicate with other diasporas and how we understand our identity, that if you can look at that at each group of people, then you can have a conversation across communities. Okay, you can go to the next one. And so we can scroll, there's another 3 or 4, and I won't go through this because of time, but just trying to look at ourselves that Africans have been moving since the beginning of time. You might call it diaspora, but you know, it's to call it diaspora, it's actually kind of futile. And so we've just tried to show how we've been moving since, you know, hundreds of thousands of years ago. And if you click one more time, but a lot of the studies and now Africans are coming to the West, but I have to add that we are also going back and forth. We have now the accessibility to move on between different locales. Okay, you can go to the next one. This is just a visual from the slave trade to show the movement. But if you go to the next one, it also shows that the slave trade is ancient and also was going to Asia as well. So we have a lot of Africans moving east and north, because a lot of European countries deny African slave trade and their homes, but that's not true. The people from France and Germany will tell you that we are descendants of slaves. Next. And then to think about this, you can slowly click through. You can slowly click. There are multiple ways of notions of diaspora, like, okay, you can stop there. Like the year of return, where African Americans are coming to Nigeria and Ghana. The Voice Society, Institute, reimagining of, I have this image here, reimagining slavery and freedom, where a lot of Afro-Brazilians came back. They've been holding on to their own version of Yoruba. So they're like, we're coming home now, right? So that also is something we have to take into account. So thinking about that is a form of migration. Africans within Africa move more than anyone outside. So we have to be looking at what's it mean for Nigerian to go to South Africa or Zimbabwean to come up to, to Kenya. And then also memory, and I won't have time to get into this, but geological accounting, Eitoke-san talks about as is important of thinking about who I am, where I came from, where they came from, where they came from. It's a process we have to keep working on now because we've lost that in some cases when it comes to our oral history as a way of understanding who we are and where we've been. And then also that spiritual and temporal migration. If you click 2 times, I just have a representation here of like the Igbo landing, during the slave trade, Igbo people, other Africans too, would commit what we call suicide on the way to the Americas or while they're there. And while the Europeans might have thought that they were killing themselves, for them, they felt that if their body died, their spirit could return home. So the spiritual migration is something that we need to pay more attention to. Okay, so I have probably very little time, so let's go to the next one. Here again. Again, this is and then 3 more times. So really just thinking again about how we can bring the disciplines together, because each of them have very strong analyses of the Black experience that are not crossing over. I talk to a lot of Black feminists, but I'm not talking to African feminists and Africana womanists. I hear a lot of neo-colonial, decolonial studies, but they're not talking to people doing racial studies, white supremacy analyses. So these things need we need to cross, kind of tear down those borders intellectually so we can imagine the art the way that it is, which is actually fluid already between these spaces. The next one. Okay, so I won't go through this, but I'll just talk about this briefly. So in Homegoing, this is by Yagyashi, and how do you say her name? Thank you. Yashi. So this book is phenomenal because it's two sisters coming from, I think, like Fantasyland. Time, okay. Okay, time. And they never meet each other. They have the same mother, and one is sold into the slave trade, and one is kind of married to marry one of the slavers, right? And so every chapter is another descendant. So you see two sisters who are both Fanti, and eventually their generations go for hundreds of years till today. And it's powerful because while they can't remember their history because of isolation, separation, enslavement, the terrors of slavery, you, the reader, sees how clearly this girl is to the one from 17 something is from 2022, whatever the book came out. And it's just powerful because you can't deny the ancestry, but you have to recognize that time and how identity has moved over time. And then next. Scent of Burnt Flowers. This book is great because it's in like 1960s, during the Black Power movement. A couple is running from the FBI, and they come to Ghana because the husband had met Kwame Nkrumah. So he's like, let me go find my friend. And so in the process, the wife is starting to come into her consciousness that she is a daughter of Yamaya. So there's this physical migration, but at the same time, she's also understanding that, until her passing, she's going to be reborn again as one of the children of Mami Wata. And I'll end there, but just thinking about like the power of us moving across disciplines, trying to understand where people are coming from in order for us to have a much richer understanding so we can move towards this. Whatever it is we're thinking about is a solution to our condition in each of our places, and that this idea of the oppression we face in the African continent and the diaspora are two sides to the same coin. Thank you. Thank you, Jim.
So next we have Chiamaka Cynthia on the this paper is titled The Lives of Black Women in Belgium, a study of Chika Negroes on Black Sister Streets.
First, I would like to thank the organizers of LSA. It's my first time in LSA, and I'm honored to lead the piece of Professor. Okay, so the title of my work I submitted is The Lives of Black Women in Belgium, a study of Chika on Black Sister Streets. But for the purpose of this presentation, I will be looking at the instances of sexual exploitation as it concerns the Black women on Sister Streets. Okay, as a rough introduction, research has shown that 84% of victims of man trafficking in West and Central Europe were trafficked for sexual exploitation. Trafficking in West African communities affects mainly the Nigerian women and girls. Some of these victims are repeated knowingly into prostitution, but most times end up in exploitative situations through deception, coercion, or violence. They understand that they will have to render sexual services, but are unaware of the condition under which they work. Studies have also shown that Nigerian victims are characterized by the debt bondage dynamics, like when they take you there, they tell you, oh, you have to pay back the money they spent in the you. So that means you don't have your freedom anymore because you owe them. Okay. Oh, sorry. I will be exploring the instances of sexual harassment on Black Sister Streets. So on Black Sister Streets is a novel, a text of all, before I go into the details. So Chika really is a Nigerian, but one of the cultural shocks she had to deal with when she got to Belgium was seeing that sex was discussed openly. And then there were like lots of Nigerians doing the sex work business. So she had to do some interviews, she had to tell some prostitutes in Belgium and in Nigeria what she wrote. So in the book, we have 4 women who found themselves in Belgium together. So they came from different backgrounds, but then circumstances brought them together. So the first person I'm going to talk about is Sisi. Sisi's real name is Chiso. She's an Igbo girl. So the fact Sisi's father is uneducated, and then he blamed it for his stagnant career. So it felt like training Sisi in school an automatic ticket out of poverty. So after graduating from the university, she was unable to get a job. She started from applying to the top banks in Lagos, but the job was not coming, and then she went down to the lower banks, but still nothing. So it was in the midst of all this frustration that she meets Dele. Dele is what's for it?
I think
Dele,
the film.
and then she infused women from Nigeria, made promises to them, and then takes them to Belgium. Okay? So Sisi, of course, if prior to now we have this idea of we are going to Europe is not. They say the grass is greener on the other side, right? So Sisi felt like she had seen an opportunity to take her family out of poverty. But then when she arrived Belgium, Antwerp precisely, she feels disappointed because it was not her expectation. And then she wrote, and I quote, "The house itself was not much to look at. Truth be told, it was quite a disappointment. A ground floor with a gobby front door, as you would find out later, 5 bedrooms, not much bigger than a telephone booth. You know how small a telephone booth can be. The sitting room was a cliche, an all-red affair, except for the long sofa, which was black, and against the wall right beside the door. A thin mirror ran through the ceiling to the roof. So she had expected a fancy house and all of that, but because that was not what she got in Antwerp. Also, on getting there, she had to, the person working with Dele in Belgium is called Madame. So she had to apply for asylum and, of course, get denied. That's it. So Madame tells her, okay, now you belong to me, and collects her passport. And then tells her that she belongs to her. It belongs to her in quotes, until she pays off her debt, and she's expected to pay 500 euros every month. Okay. Then, as the story continues, Sisi meets Locke at a Pentecostal church where they prayed. One of the girls worshipped. So they start the relationship. At first, she was reluctant because she felt that unworthy because of the kind of job she was doing. But at the end of the day, they start a romantic relationship. And Sisi was determined to leave the current life she was living, and then finally makes a decision to leave, which eventually leads to her death. Then the second person we have is Amma. So Amma's story is a bit different from Sisi's story. Amma was raped by her father continuously from her 8th birthday to when she left the house. And then when the thing continued until the father accuses her of being lazy because she failed her JAMB. For those of us who are not Nigerians, JAMB is like the exam it takes to get into tertiary institution, right? So the father accuses her of being lazy for failing the JAMB exam. So she flares up and accuses the father of raping her. Because the mother always saw her in the morning and, oh, she have her pillow. I don't know how to explain her pillow now, but
Conjunctivitis.
yeah. And so the mother always thought maybe she was not feeling well because after the incident she had to cry the whole night, so she doesn't get enough sleep. And then after she made the accusation, the father did not deny, rather he says, and I quote, "I am not your father." You hear that? I took in your mother, and this is all the thanks I get. All the thanks I get for saving you from being a bastard. So apparently, Brother Cyril, that's Ama's father, took in Ama's mother when she was pregnant for Ama. And then in our culture, I would say, Brother Cyril would feel like he was doing Ama's mother a favor by saving her face so that she won't have a child outside marriage. So all this while, Ama felt like Brother Cyril was her biological father. So after the altercation that night, Ama was sent to Lagos to go and live with Mama Eko, the mother's sister. Mama Eko runs a buka in Lagos, and Ama met Dele at Mama Eko's buka, and then that was how she landed in Belgium. Then we have the third person, Efe. Efe lost her mother at a very young age, and then the father could not deal with the grief of losing the wife, and then he turns to alcohol. So he goes out and comes back drunk every day. So Efe starts to take care of the family and then her younger siblings. And then at the age of 16, she was introduced to sex by Titus, who was promising her heaven on earth. So eventually she got pregnant, and Titus did not take responsibility for the pregnancy. Then she carried it, and then she pregnant the child. After the child was born, things were pretty tough for Efe, and then she takes the child to the father. But maybe the man is a chronic cheat, because the scenario when she went there, the man didn't even utter a word, but the wife was the one that was accusing her of wanting to seducing the husband and all of that because the husband is rich. So she had to go home and then continue taking care of her son. By the way, her son's name is Lucky. So she started taking up menial jobs, and in the process of looking for this job, she meets Dele, and then Dele promises to find her a cleaning job in Europe. And that's how she found herself in Europe cleaning. Then we have the last person. The last person is Joyce. Her real name is Alex, and she's not Nigerian. So she lost her family in a militant attack, and then also got raped by the attackers. So she had to seek refuge in a refugee camp here. And then in camp, she meets Polycarp, a Nigerian soldier who was working there. Eventually, they fall in love, and later Polycarp was redeployed back to Nigeria, and then she had to come with him. But Polycarp is an Igbo man, and his parents were not in support of him marrying a foreign woman. So he had to meet Dele, and then made arrangements for Joyce to be sent to Belgium. But before that, they had to give her a new identity because she was in Nigeria without documents. So they had to get her a passport, and they changed her name from Alec to Joyce, and then her state of origin to Benin. Okay, so in conclusion, these characters grapple with harsh realities, and these harsh realities was what brought them together in Belgium. Prior to Sissy's death, they were living independently. They didn't know anything about each other. But after Sissy died mysteriously, because up to the end of the novel, they were unaware of what happened to Sissy. So the two tracks, and their only hope lay in fostering a sense of sisterhood with the hope of breaking free from Dele, Madame, and Black Sister Street. on this. Thank you.
Thank you to our panelists. Do you want to take questions one at a time, or should we take a group of questions and answer them in groups? What's your preference? Okay, so we'll take questions for the panelists, for the panel as a whole, or for them individually. Please remember, tell us who you are and keep your question or comment brief.
Thanks so much, all panelists.
Who are you?
Oh, sorry. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Ben Nicholson. I teach film and media in the States, Portland State University. I was fascinated by all the presentations, the presentation on this history of translation of Nigerian literature into Mandarin. What can you say about the audience? I'm curious if you could say a little bit more about the audience, like in the presence for Nigerian literature. What kinds of I don't know, like blogs or online communities discussing the literature, interest in the kind of ongoing contemporary state of that kind of literature translating.
Thank you. Any other questions you need to? Oh, yes, please introduce yourself to me.
Hello.
Volume.
Sorry. So when you were talking about geosocial abilities, a lot of examples of parents actually mentioned have this like spiritual element to them. Your references to Brazil and Cuba, I'm to think about the significance of indigenous African cosmologies in the making of space and so on. I wondered if you could elaborate on how that sort of features in your understanding and reading of geosocial.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay, my question is okay, my name is Esther Uwandi from University of So my question is directed to the last speaker, Cynthia, on it's a question on also like something that you think on to improve your writings. Yeah. So I didn't see the connection of how exploitation affected the film or the relevance of migration and exploitation, because you talked about the lives of Black women in Belgium. You can say the lives of Black women in Europe or America or any part of the globe. How does migration affect these women? Because you mentioned exploitation, it is very important. And something for you to think about. It would be necessary for you to link all this instead of more of narratology, narrating the story. This is what happened. This is what happened. It will be important for you to tell us the significance of how the experiences of these women are worthy of, let's say, research. Why are you talking about their experiences? We can as well get the summary from online, but we want to see the relevance, the significance of their experiences and how migration affects them. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. So you guys answer and take another question. If anyone, please share this answer.
Thank you for your question. I think that for this kind of studies, I like the research studies. But from my daily observations, that a lot of the audience for this Nigerian novels and dramas literatures are researchers from different kinds of universities. Like this book I've mentioned, have studied in the Department of African Studies, where I was seeing, and also the Department of English Studies, Department of Chinese Studies, which they study the translation of this Nigerian words, and also the Department of Comparative Studies. these are the basic core development where students and researchers have reading groups and keep discussing about these works. And I also noticed that on social media, like Little Red Book, which is a Chinese version of Instagram, where people keep on posting this marketing like pictures of these books, especially for those written by the female authors, often co-accident with some kind of trends like to trends. But I'm not very sure whether they post them voluntarily or spontaneously, or maybe they are suggested or hired by some kind of media process to help them to promote them. This is my observation.
Yeah, thank you.
Do you mind asking a question one more time to make sure I'm on point?
Oh, okay. So I was asking if you could elaborate on what the significance of indigenous African cosmologies are in your understanding or analysis of geosocial mobility. So, because an example is from Amazing Freshwater to Opposite House and some of the sort of real life places that you mentioned, the elements of spirituality and the metaphysical seem relevant or perhaps crucial to your reading of spatiality.
I think I still need, I'll be honest, I still need to work on thinking about that, like specific skills of mobility. For instance, I have been working on with freshwater, understanding our cosmological positioning as people as it helps to read freshwater as a way of understanding genders and multiple gender identity as a way to kind of deconstruct Western notions of like LGBTQ and move more towards understanding what it means to embody or be able to commune with multiple spirits and how that manifests itself in the physical realm. And I think that the one film that I didn't get a chance to talk about was Sankofa by Haile Gerima, which I really love. And in that one, you have a woman who is like a model taking pictures at the slave castle in Ghana in Cape Coast and is unaware of the significance of where she is. And then she's called back to the past. And so I think that Haile Gerima is trying to make sense of what it means to connect with one, nature spiritually, like the fact that the only way she's able to free herself from. So when what happens is she's sent back to her past as an enslaved woman in the location of the United States. And her way to freedom is to free herself physically from her enslaver. But as a result of that, she's able to bring herself to a spiritual knowledge of self that is, perhaps indigenous. Well, sorry, but in general. And I think that offers a way to think about what it means to connect with something beyond what's just the last 400 years of religion, and understand that we have this ancient knowledge of self that's important to our personal freedoms. So I'm looking at it, I'm learning it for myself, but I'm still maybe need to connect it better to your point about like how it moves with migration. But I think freshwater is great because it happens anyway for her, because she's in a space where she's like on death's door. And so she has to come to acknowledge who she is and connect with her chief. Like literally connecting with her chief. And our people say that, you cannot challenge your chief to a wrestling match. And so her connecting with her chief is her way of being able to find some type of peace and way forward, So I think the survival of indigeneity is at the center of what I'm looking at, that the survival is happening regardless of whether or not we are aware or even acknowledging of it, and that the authors are bringing that forward as a way to help us kind of decode, our realities.
So that Okay. So thank you for your observation and comments. So this, what I presented is actually kind of final project, and I still hope to be a little bit further, which was why I presented. So I will take into account what you said, and then see if I can really get more.
So we still have time for more questions. So there are more questions. Yes.
My name is Shalom Pizza. Yeah. So I have a question. So it's concerning the African studies, Black studies, and African diaspora studies. So I understand that interrelated. So I want you to just elaborate on like Black studies and African diaspora studies. Like what's particularly like is there a difference between the two studies that is very clear? I don't know if you understand what
I do understand what you're saying. Definitely for all of them, every school, every, school of thought is gonna have a different framing, especially when it comes to like African American studies, the nomenclature and the approach, they are varying, but I say Black studies because that's how I was trained. So, I see, and then there's Africana studies, which, perhaps. So I see Black studies as, one, it came out of the Black liberation movement, out of what was eventually the civil rights movement. It was one of the demands of, towards freedom for Black Americans, right? We need a study of us that's led by us, right? And before we can understand our racial disparity and our oppression and think about ways forward. Right, so Black studies often is this kind of more radical notion of the study that comes out of resistance. And in Black studies, there's a lot of different things. So Black studies now wants to also incorporate African studies to say that it's Black people globally, like it's not just Black studies in the US, but Black people racially exist around across the country, across the world. And so as a result, we can understand our racial oppression globally through this frame of study. So it has to be a focus on the study of this race and Blackness, global Blackness. But it can also incorporate cultural studies. There are a lot of studies of ancient Africa that come into it and such. But wherever I've seen that idea of Blackness and Black identity, whether it be Africa or outside of Africa, is central, and that's the history of it coming from the Black Power movement. African diaspora studies may or may not focus on the study of race, and because Black studies, I think, has been such a focus on Black America, right, African America, that sometimes it's only stays in that country. Like if someone did Nigerian studies or someone did Ghana studies, but it's not supposed to be. It's supposed to be global. But a lot of spaces might only focus on the Americas. Where the diaspora is like, no, we are now trying to focus on anywhere Black people are outside of Africa. But then often it may not include a study of Africa at all, in the way that sometimes Black studies does. So I often see it like for the African Association, the worldwide. The Association for the Worldwide Study of the African Diaspora, you have people like Ademi and I who do focus on African studies within it, but I think on a large part, you have a lot of people studying locales like Brazil or Cuba or England or whatever, but rarely make connections back to Africa. So it's sometimes very disconnected. Yeah, that's my understanding generally. Yeah.
He's not outside, so. All right, I'll ask him. Yes, for us. All right, well, thank you for your great presentation. So I have a question for everybody. Okay, I was really curious about when you said that Chinese women and specific companies should Nigerian history of speech transmitted. There seems to kind of resonance with some kind of commonalities. Can you say a little bit more about the content of the translation and how it should see in China and how close they are? Like, is it translation in spirit or is it just sort of like a literal translation of that text? What is its quality of the translations and why are people seeing these resonances with Chinese and Nigerian? But Ola, I was really struck by what you said about how culture changes differently in different parts of the diaspora, how you see Yoruba culture being different in diaspora, how, let's say, people have responded to the crazy sets on pressure what's happening, the ways that people critique for the understanding of the government. And how do we address resolve these tensions? Right, so that in the way that diaspora makes this, the way that Africans experience differently through time and space. And on Black history, I'm curious, you see, following up on the significance question in the presentation, do you see a difference in the forms or the impact or consequences of exploitation when women are in Africa and when they're in Belgium? Is there a difference in the impact of the exploitation that they face?
I didn't look at that. I didn't look at that, the impact of the exploitation. So, and then for some of women, they didn't feel the exploitation in Nigeria. So it was.
I was thinking about the example you gave, the one who was sexually assaulted and ends up in prostitution. So she's having two different types of problems.
Yeah, for Amma, who was sexually abused by the father. So while she was in Nigeria, the impact was that she became a bit withdrawn. She would stay in her room and be talking to the world. So even though when Dele came, she knew Amma, for instance, knew she was going to prostitute, but then she felt like, okay, I have been abused by a man I once called father. So I mean, it's not a big deal if I'm going to do it for me. I think that was the impact on her inside. But then for the other people, yeah, I
think people will be curious about that.
I will answer that maybe when I will think you want something. Okay, because I recently did this work of Black Streets. So I look at exploitation as something that happens both in Africa and when women migrate. So in Africa, yesterday I mentioned about the push factor and the pull factor. One of the push factor include exploitation, and I looked at the exploitation going beyond sexual. Like for the case of CC, I looked at it as economic or political exploitation, because not having a job after 2 years of graduating with a good result made her decide moving, even when she's aware of what she's going in to do. For Amma, you mentioned she has been sexually exploited by her stepfather, not her father. Suti mentioned that by her stepfather, not her father, and it was a more reason for her to decide to move. And Daily exploits her also, not rape. She's aware, so she consents to that sexual abuse. That's an exploitation. For Joyce, who becomes for Joyce, Alec who becomes Joyce, at the end of the day, there's exploitation. Her name change is also exploitative for her, for identity to be changed. And we can see so many. She was also sexually abused by the junta with militia. So many exploitations. So exploitation is something that would make women decide to leave. Very, very important. So,
yeah, sure.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I feel like I live in the middle of those tensions, as well. I've just been, I can't say it from like a intellectual perspective, perhaps more from a personal perspective. Even my reading of Emezi is not one that I would so like willingly present like at this conference, because of our there's I chose not to present that paper here, just for my own safekeeping. But then there is something about living in the US my whole life and identifying with Igbo culture, but being raised in Black culture. That means that I am going to live in a different space of knowing perhaps becoming another part of another tribe, so to speak, when we talk about these tribalisms. Because each of us has our own, like ontological positioning, even if we're true to even our indigenous heritage. So I don't know the answer to that. I just
I think that being amongst people who have a claim to their identity and don't understand the other side, and I live in the middle of that on a constant, I often just trying to get people to at least listen, but again, I don't think that's necessarily like a solution that can like fix things, but I think maybe one by one, we can just say, okay, that's not my way, but I see this is where you're coming from. So I don't know the answer to it. I just know how I'm approaching it.
Thank you for your question. I would like to say that most of the tasks by female authors tend to be secularized, especially instead of represented in a very special way. I can remember at the ending of the novel, the girl speaking out loud, which when I read English version, I think that at the end of the story, the girl prayed for all other women that she cries, and she also sees sunshine around her. And this is a very spiritual situation, and I think it's related to her Christianity belief. But in the Chinese version of this novel, I think it just treated like that, make me feel like that. The girl is having more sunshine around her because she's admitted by that university. So she's going to have a better life and better way of social upwardness because of her approach, her accessibility to that kind of education. So I think this emphasis of education fits into both Chinese female readers' imagination of getting a better social position by trying hard to training hard in the educational system. And I do not think maybe the translator did not do it intentionally. Maybe he or she is just doing it or work towards literary translation. And because for the publishing sector industry in China, the translators' pay and salary can be very low because they try to minimize the pay to the translators and devote more to the marketing. So they can hire someone who may not be trained in terms of African literatures and cultures to translate. So I think maybe the translator do not do it intentionally. It's just the physical translation of the book.
Of course, we have time for a couple more. Yes.
Thanks to
yes.
I should know by now. So my name is Nathan. I teach literature at Emory University in the US. And to Dr. Nuwabara, to colleague Michelle Wright, who works in studies, and she has an article about homegoing and Chintu, previous novel, but just curious if you hadn't come across it, but might be interesting. She thinks about sort of what she calls vertical as compared to horizontal models of diaspora. And so the diaspora is kind of vertical model of descent that Chintu was more interested in kind of diasporas of mobility in the continent. So that it was thought provoking.
Thank you. I haven't read that. I know it is, I haven't read it. You have an article or?
I will look it up.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
One more thing.
Oh, is running there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Thank you for coming to engage with our panelists, and thank you to our three panelists and excellent papers, and thank you for joining us on the chemist. Thank you.